Hello, class. Let's talk about the first morning in John Perry's dialogue on good, evil, and the existence of God. Here are some study guide questions to help us get started. 1. Why does Weirob reject Miller's offer for prayer? 2. How does Miller respond to Weirob's objection? 3. Which problem does Weirob raise for Miller's claims about prayer? 4. What is Manicheanism? 5. What does Weirob challenge Miller to do? 6. What is Miller's first attempt to answer Weirob's challenge, which we might call the mereological answer? 7. What is Weirob's response to the mereological answer? Okay, as always, I'm going to go through these study guide questions and provide the answers, and as I do so, you may want to take notes on a pad of paper, type them up on your laptop, crochet them into a sweater, etc., so that you can better retain the information. So our dialogue begins with Gretchen Weirob, henceforth referred to as Weirob, and she is very, very sick. She's suffering a cold or a flu or something, and Sam Miller, henceforth Miller, has come over with some cinnamon rolls and some coffee to cheer her up. The first thing that happens is Miller asks whether he can say a prayer for Weirob. Miller is a Christian, of course, and Weirob, being an atheistic philosopher, initially says no. More specifically, she says, Miller doesn't need to say a prayer, because if Miller's God exists, says Weirob, he already knows that Weirob is sick. There's nothing that a prayer will do to notify God of Weirob's condition. That's how Weirob responds to Miller's offer of prayer. She says that the prayer would be useless because God already knows that she's sick. Now, Miller's response is to remind Weirob that the prayer isn't to communicate to God. The prayer is to communicate to her. The prayer is meant to be a kind of social activity in which Miller reminds Weirob that Weirob is in the hands of an all-knowing, all-powerful, morally good God, and so it can't be all bad even though she's suffering from sickness. That's Miller's response to Weirob's rejection of his offer of prayer, is to say that the prayer is for her, not for God. Now, it's at this point that the real philosophy in the dialogue starts, and Weirob raises the problem of evil in response to Miller's offer. Weirob more specifically says that she cannot be comforted with the idea that there's an all-knowing, all-powerful, morally good God, because that very sort of thing is logically inconsistent with her being sick. She says that there's a puzzle about this, an inconsistency. More specifically, it's the problem of evil. The problem of evil says that if there's an all-knowing, all-powerful, morally good God, then evil should not exist. That's because if God is morally good, he wouldn't want evil to exist. And if God is all-powerful, God could stop evil from existing as long as he knew about it. And if God is all-knowing, he would know about it. So if there is in fact evil, goes the problem, God must not know about it, not care about it, or be powerless to stop it. That's the problem of evil. The problem of evil says that the existence of evil is logically inconsistent with the existence of an all-knowing, all-powerful, morally good God. Now, after Weirob presents this problem to Miller, they talk for a bit, and one topic that arises is Manicheanism. Manicheanism is a particular sort of view. It's not a Christian view, but it's related. It, like Christianity, was heavily influenced by Platonism and in particular Gnosticism, and the two characters discuss how Manicheanism has its own sort of way out of the problem of evil, albeit not a Christian way. According to Manicheans, there are actually two divine principles, or two gods, at work in the universe. There is on one hand a good God, but there's also on the other hand an evil God. And these sorts of principles are equally real, equally potent, equally powerful, neither one created the other, and it's because of their constant opposition that evil exists. Now, of course, this characterization of Manicheanism is simple, and the interlocutors readily admit as much. But in this dialogue, Manicheanism is basically the way of getting out of the problem of evil by saying that there are two divine entities, a good one and an evil one. Or I suppose maybe it wouldn't be correct to say the evil one is divine. You might say it's infernal, supernaturally bad, that sort of thing. And that brings us to Weirob's challenge. After discussing Manicheanism and the problem of evil, Weirob issues this challenge to Miller. She says that if Miller can explain how it's logically consistent for evil to exist in the same world as an all-knowing, all-powerful, morally good God, then Weirob will let Miller say a prayer for her. That's her challenge, just that little thing, solve the problem of evil. And off they go. Now, the first attempt Miller makes to solve the problem of evil is what we might call the mereological answer. We're calling it that because the Greek word meros, or mere, means part, or parts. And Miller's first attempt to solve the problem of evil appeals to relations between a whole and its parts. More specifically, Miller notes that the quality of an entire thing can be increased if one small part of it is bad. The quality of an entire thing can be increased if one small part of it is bad. He gives the example of an exciting novel, which is made more exciting because an earlier chapter or two is dull. Or a satisfying fishing trip, which wouldn't have felt as satisfying if there wasn't a little bit of hardship in the morning. Or a baseball game whose climax wouldn't seem as intense and exciting if there wasn't a relatively slow and comparatively boring build-up. Each of these are examples where the quality of an entire thing is improved by the fact that a small part of it or parts of it are actually bad. Now, by analogy, Miller's answer to the problem of evil has got to be something like this, that the quality of an entire world or an entire life is increased if only there's a little bit of evil in it, a little bit of suffering, stubbing one's toe, getting a little sick as Weirob is, and so on. This is the mereological answer. It comes in a couple different varieties. On one hand, there's a version of the mereological answer which says that in order for the entire thing, like the whole world, to be as good as possible, it needs some little bad bits. And then there's another version of the mereological answer which says, in order for us to know how good the world is, there has to be some bad to contrast it with. Right? There's sort of a metaphysical version of the mereological answer, and then there's an epistemological or knowledge-based version of the mereological answer, right? What they have in common is that the whole thing has to have some little bad bits in it, and that's why there's any bad bits in the world at all. In one version, they say that the entire thing can't be as good as it is unless there's little bad bits, and the other version, they say we couldn't know how good the whole thing is unless there were some little bad bits. But that's the mereological answer, which Miller proposes, although he doesn't use the term mereological. Now, Weirob offers a couple of responses to Miller's mereological answer, one of them importantly being the disanalogy between real, actual evil in the world and, say, a boring chapter in the novel, or a boring inning in a ball game, or a little bit of discomfort getting up to go fishing. Real world involving atrocities and catastrophes and the death and suffering of millions are not the sorts of things that we would want to compare to just a casually bad chapter in a novel. But more importantly, Weirob emphasizes God's omnipotence. Remember, an omnipotent being can do anything. And because an omnipotent being can do anything, that also means there's nothing that an omnipotent being has to do. An omnipotent being doesn't have to do anything because they're all powerful. So for example, if somebody says that you can't make the whole world as good as possible unless you put some evil in it, what you're effectively saying is that God is helpless to create an entirely good world. God is incapable of creating an entirely good world. God cannot but create a world with little bits of evil because there's something God can't do, namely create a world that's entirely good. Weirob says that if you're really a Christian and you believe in the kind of God that Miller does, you shouldn't accept that idea. In other words, Weirob says that the mereological answer goes against God's omnipotence. If God is omnipotent, why would he have to include any evil at all? Why can't he just make the world without the evil? And likewise with our knowledge. If God can do anything, God could just give us knowledge of goodness. He doesn't have to force us to live with evil so that we understand what real goodness is. He could just give us the knowledge. That's omnipotence after all. So Weirob dismisses Miller's mereological answers to the problem of evil by saying that they go against the idea of God's omnipotence. And at that point, the discussion in the first morning ceases. When next they pick up discussion, it's the first afternoon, and at that point their friend Dave Cohen joins them. We'll pick up with them then in our next video. Thanks for watching.